will be helping us with our Q&A portion of the session. So we wanted to both thank you for joining us. We have two very special guests that I will introduce you in just a moment. But today our focus for our session is focusing on how an efficient car process can help you create more at-bats for your business, create more cross-sell opportunities, and really uncover those gaps in your client's coverage as well. So that's really what our focus and our goal is today. And before we introduce to you our special guest, I want to take a step back for a moment, and we want to review what the 4-step car process that we've all been talking about for some time is, just so we can get back to the basics in the beginning here. So the first step of our car process is schedule that client meeting. So you want to make sure you have that efficient process. Maybe you have a caller in a house that you are having scheduled those appointments. Maybe you're using vFile or MCC. We want you to think about how are you creating that activity here on the front end so that you can conduct the client annual reviews. Second, prepare for that client annual review, conduct the client review, and then the last step, which is one of the most important steps, is making sure that you do have that efficient process built in for those follow-up calls. So if follow-up meetings, so if you have a life opportunity that you need to follow up in your next after your 30-minute meeting, that's when you'll want to make sure that you have that process in place as well. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce to you our very special guest, Darla Hacker. She is from the Central Minnesota District. She started with Country back in 2019, and she is a farm certified rep, I believe, as of 2025, which is excellent. And she also signed up with vFile in February 2025, so right after Enrich. She's had a really fast start to utilizing the vFile and really transforming her car process. So that's why we've asked her to join us today. So thanks, Darla, for joining us. We also, the second portion of our session, we're going to have Jim Bologna from vFile. He is the CEO and founder of vFile. He has been an industry expert. He's an industry expert. Has been within our industry for the last 2 decades. So we're excited to hear from him. He's going to give us, more of that behind the scenes, what their process looks like, and how it can really fully integrate with our current car process, that 4-step process that I just covered here in the beginning. Okay, so this is really more of an informal session here. We have the Q&A at the top of the chat box here, and we really highly encourage you to ask your questions to Darla. So as we're going through, please enter your questions. We'll get to them. I have a few questions to kick us off here. But Darla, if you want to go ahead and start your camera up, we'll go ahead and start the first part of our session. All right. Welcome, Darla. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So I guess just starting out here at the beginning, Darla, tell us about yourself and what your office structure looks like.
Yeah, so like you said, I started with Country Financial in 2019, and my office structure is just myself. I did have an assistant that I had for a short while until she gave me another grandbaby. So I figured that was probably a pretty good trade for her leaving me. But so then it became myself again, right? And she was just working for me part-time. And that's where when we went to Enrich and then I sat in on the vFiles meeting, it really intrigued me to maybe take a look in that direction as well, because there were so many factors involved. So it's just myself and I in the office. So
thanks, Darla. All right, so to kick us off here, like I said, if you just joined us, go ahead and enter your questions for Darla. If you're in the chat box, we'll go over some. But I'll kick us off with our first question. Can you describe your car process? Just from the scheduling to the preparing, to conducting, and then the last step was the follow-up. Can you describe what that process looks like and how you've integrated e-file into that process?
Yeah, so B-Files, hands down, was one of the best things that I ever did. When I came home from Enrich, I really thought more deeply into it in regards to what that would look like for my business and how that would operate. And so when I got into looking at that, one thing I kind of want to back up just a minute for, as I was stating, I had my daughter-in-law was my assistant. And then when she decided to stay home with the baby, that left me with nobody again. And I remember the process that I had to go through in order to wait for her to get trained, in order for her to help me in my business even. And the waiting for the training was grueling because it was like, oh, I need you to get done with your training because I really need to offload some of my stuff to you, right? And so that's where it came more of a no-brainer is what I call it, to bring on B-Files, because number one, they're already trained. They don't have, you don't have to worry about whether they're going to take vacation or not. You don't have to worry about whether they're sick that day or not. They have all these people that are at your disposal that are already trained through the B-Files in order to help you out immediately. And so I love that. And the fact that they calling from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. I believe it is on Saturdays. So when you look at those hours, I was like, man, I get more than a full-time person even by just the calling alone. And I'm spending just as much with B-Files as what I was spending on my assistant when she was good trade, maybe even, could I say, an upgraded trade, simply because I have them working more hours for me than what I had as an assistant. But with the car process, how I've implemented the B-Files, they have such great questions that lead into the next thing. And so it's a great transition for when I sit down with my client. I don't really use the verbiage that's on the B-Files thing. You can use it if you want to. But the moment my client walks in, when B-Files has set up an appointment with me, the very first thing I say is, today we are going to have a liability conversation. And with this liability conversation, it is the questions that are going to be asked is anything and everything that could be prone to a lawsuit for you. And so we want to cover the liability part of this. I want to make sure that I am doing my due diligence for you. You have hired me to do a job, and so therefore I want to do it to the best of my ability. And so let's go through these questions, make sure everything is set correctly, because at the end, this risk calculator that we are now using is very accurate. And at the end, it's going to tell us where things should be, and let's see how well we've done. And so then, therefore, then I just walk right through the questions that are on the B-Files. And B-Files really has become my agenda, just simply because of the way the platform is laid out. Because when you ask the question, it leads from one thing right into the next to the next. It shows you all of your cross-sell opportunities. It shows you your life opportunities. It even shows you your financial opportunities. And so with me, I am a referring agent. I do not have my financials. And so I work closely with Tom Jelinski in that matter. And so I find through the questions, I find the things that need to be referred, and then I get Tom involved. We had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Darla, for explaining what your process looks like and how you integrate B-File. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. So thanks everyone for adding your questions. Please feel free to keep continuing to. Our first question, Darla, is from Thomas. Thomas is asking, are you using MCC and B-File together, or are you just using B-File for cars, for your car appointment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought about doing both at first, but my situation is a little bit unique because I live in Alexandria, Minnesota, but my office is in Morris, Minnesota, which is an hour away. And so I started out working and building my book in Alexandria, and then have been in Morris as well. So 3 days out of the week I'm in Morris, and 2 days out of the week I'm in Alexandria. So it kind of divides up my time. With MCC calling, the thing that I ran into was when they would call and leave a message for somebody, which was great and fine, all of a sudden then I would get a phone call back from the client that they called asking, oh, did you call me? And then I was like, well, no. And it just was like odd because I didn't know when they were calling and when they weren't. So it just made it feel a little bit awkward for me in regards to the fact that I never knew when they were calling or who they were calling. And so it was kind of intrusive too sometimes when you'd be in the middle of a quote, somebody would call you and you just made you sound kind of dumb, I guess you could say. That's just my perspective on it, but B-Files is so much better just simply because of the fact when I make that list for them, at the end of that list, I will tell them, here's where I meet them. If I meet them at their home, or if I normally will meet them for a coffee or a lunch or something like that. And that way it kind of integrates them in being part of my team and being able to go, oh, I see that she normally meets you at Caribou Coffee, or she, your favorite spot is such and such a restaurant, right? For my farmers, of course, all of my farmers are always at their home. The only time that they actually will come into my office is if they're running into town for parts. And they say, well, I'm going to be in town anyway, then I'll stop by your office. And so that's the only time that I really have them come to my office, because I want to be respectful to their time. And they're busy people because of course they're running a business just like we are. And for me, being out at their home, I can do business with them. And as soon as I leave, they can just walk right back out to work without having that drive time and things like that, because they're very busy.
Great, thanks, Darla. So it sounds like you put some time in the front end to really like look at your car list on a monthly basis and add that preferred location to where you want to meet, and that's driven results overall for you. Good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Darla. Okay, we have another question. Great question from Ashton. What's the best way to transition from discussing the car topics to using B-File?
Yeah, good question. Being that I use the B-File as my agenda, because at the end, when it calculates everything together, it brings everything together that they've answered the questions on. It says what the liability should be for their home and their auto. It says what they need for life insurance. It will also list things like boats or ATVs or secondary land, if they need insurance on them as a cross-sell opportunity. So really, I just mark right down when it comes to the last page on the B-Files questionnaire thing. And I utilize that as my agenda to know, what are we talking about next? Here's what we're talking about next. Let's take a look at what did it say that your auto liability should be at. And for me, I always have the declaration pages printed out ahead of time, because that way I don't have to try and look it up at my computer and things like that, because we know how computers can be sometimes. So I always have it printed out ahead of time. That's part of my prepping for the appointment. And then once we've gone through the questions and everything, I grab the auto sheet and say, okay, how are we doing in regards to the liability on the insurance compared to what B-File says we should have? And we take a look at both of those things, and then it turns out that either we've already nailed it, we're like, all right, cool, we're already there, or we will just kind of talk about what the importance is of maybe raising that a little bit. Yes, maybe it will bring your premiums up a little bit, but don't you want to know that Country Financial's got your back in the case that would have an accident, somebody would try and come after you. We want to make sure that we're protecting you the best that we can. So, and then of course the umbrella conversations come up too, because it will list, if they need an umbrella, how much that umbrella should be for. So we always want to do our due diligence with that, making sure that our client is covered properly.
Thank you, Darla. Yeah, so it sounds like you're printing those deck pages out. Your first step is going through the calculator, identifying those gaps, everything like that, and then we're going to the deck pages to cross-reference and open that conversation up.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Darla, for explaining that. We have some more questions that came in. So The next one is from Larry. This is a great question. Are you trying to manage their calls, including follow-ups? Or are you just simply letting them do what they do and taking appointments as they come? That's a good question, because I know, Darla, I think you mentioned earlier, you do have e-file, or can you explain that process? At the end of the calculator, the end of the appointment, what does that follow-up and thank you process look like?
Yeah, that's the other part that I love about V-Files, because once you hit complete and submit, it brings up a whole nother screen for you to be able to have them call them back. So like say we've gone through their review and there's a life opportunity. And a lot of times, you know, how they want us to keep our cars to like about 30 minutes. And that's a great part about utilizing the V-Files end screen. The very last screen gives the date in which you want them to call them back and set them up on for your bookings again, whether it be a life appointment, a cross sell of some kind, the financials for if you want to get together with your FA. They have all these different things that you can click on there, and then you set the date and send it back to your caller. And then that caller will call them and get them back on your calendar again for that next appointment. And I've done that so many times. The great thing is that when V-Files calls it back, the one check mark that's automatically checked all the time is thank yous and referrals. So every time they come in, they will do a thank you call for you, and they will ask for referrals every time. And so that's a nice part too, because sometimes I don't, in my past of doing it myself, I haven't always been great at asking for referrals. And so it's just one more thing that's off my plate that they do for me. And then I can kick it back to them to get that back on my calendar again, which is really nice.
Thank you, Darla. Larry. Feel free to interrupt. Our next question is from Adrian. Do you send V-File a list of farm prospects as well?
I'm in the process of creating that right now. So yes, I intend to be setting them for farm prospects. And the great thing is that you can, you know, we can generate those on our computers with that little AI thing, or we can go through, like for me, I like to use the plat books because it gives names, addresses, phone numbers in there too. So I'm in the midst of creating that right now, but that's the other part that's nice. They will call up to 50 prospects per month for you.
That's perfect. Great question. And can you explain, Darla, you mentioned the AI tool that you use for the prospects? I know some of us on the line aren't aware of what that is. Can you explain how you utilize that?
Yeah, so when you go into your, what's it called? Microsoft Edge, there's this little colorful little button. It's not quite a butterfly, but it's a multicolored thing up in the corner. And when you click on that, it brings up an AI listing that you can put in there what exactly you're looking for and tell it to put it into an Excel format for you. And it actually will do that. And you can put in specific zip codes and everything, and it pulls in all that information for you.
Fantastic. Thanks for the tip there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if anyone has any other questions on that, enter them in the chat box. But let's go ahead, and if you have any more questions, keep them coming. I have another one for Darla. Darla, I know you mentioned here at the beginning that you're a referral agent and you refer over to a financial advisor in your district. Can you tell us, what are some good ways that you found to transition into that financial conversation with your clients?
Yeah, so when you're going through the V-Files questionnaire, it comes up and it says, do you have a retirement plan? And if they say yes, then there's a little pop-up that says, you know, do you have a 401k, a pension plan, a 401(b) or whatever they are. Anyway, non-FA. But it brings up different things that you can actually check mark on. And so once it does that, say I check mark 401k, then it'll ask how much is in your 401k. So that you can get those amounts ahead of time. And so then from there, it goes into the next screen where it'll ask you if you have like IRAs or cryptocurrencies and all these different things. And so if they say yes to that, well, how much is in there? And that includes like their savings account, things like that. So, it makes it easy for you to find the cross-sell opportunity for financials. And at that point, I say, no, I, actually on my team, because I call him a team member, because that's what we are. And I say, as part of my team, I have a financial advisor that I work with, and I would love to connect him up with you to see if we can help you out with your financials. A lot of times too, I will also ask if the conversation has come up that they've changed jobs recently. I will ask the question, well, do you have any orphan 401ks from your previous employer? And if they say yes, like, okay, well, do you know what those look like and who's manning them? Because then it puts the question in their mind, like, oh yeah, who is manning them? Because before I had somebody doing it when I worked there, but now it's a question mark. And so I found things that way, which I've been able to refer over to the FA, and we've been able to transfer those 401ks into Country Financial for them. And somebody is manning them for them now, where they were just orphans before.
Fantastic. Thank you for touching on that, very Starla. Landry has a question here in the chat box regarding referrals. Do you know how many referrals you've gotten from eFile since you've been having them call for you?
I'm unaware of any at the moment. People are very shy about giving referrals. A lot of times they want them to come to you, but that I know of, I don't think I've gotten any thus far.
Question, thanks for touching on that. And another one regarding the financial conversation, since the questionnaire asks about all kinds of financial questions, have you received many objections to the questionnaire from existing clients who've never given such info before? How are you overcoming those objections? Good question, Larry.
Yeah, so I set the stage ahead of time, like I said, say we're gonna have a liability conversation today. And when it comes down to the fact that any of these questions that I'm asking could leave them open to a lawsuit, they actually don't have any problem answering the questions whatsoever. They will walk right through and answer every single one. I've never had anybody tell me not that they weren't gonna answer something. It's for their benefit, so.
Definitely, yeah, really good question, Larry, and thank you. That's good insight too, Darla. Okay, so we have one more question here, and after, if you have a couple more come in, that's fine, and then we'll transition over to you, Jim, here. Adrian's asking, is there an agreement between you and the client at the end of the appointment, so they are expecting a call where a follow-up appointment is to be scheduled, or is it just a hope that when eFile completes the follow-up call, they will attempt to schedule for a cross sale?
No, but I always tell them, I say, I'm gonna keep you back to my assistant, I call her my assistant. And I say, I'm gonna keep you back to my assistant, that way she can get you back on the books again for a life appointment or that financial appointment, whatever. That way they know they're gonna be receiving another phone call and that we're gonna be meeting again.
Great way to set the stage for that, yeah. Perfect, good question too, Adrian. All righty, since I don't see any other questions in the chat box here, we're gonna go ahead. Actually, there might be one more couple here. Oh, we'll cover these quick. Okay, Logan asked, how many people are on the list you send to eFile? What's your scheduling success rate?
Boy, I think that would be a good question for eFile. They have got people in my seats that I've not been able to get in my seats. Let's put it that way. People that I've never met, that will actually come and get in my seat, talk with me, that I've had issues getting in my seat. So they do a really good job of that. And I don't know, I would say out of the list that I've seen in my listing, there's probably only been like maybe 10 out of 90 calls that say they're not interested.
That's great. Good question, Logan. Alrighty, another question. Good to hear from you, Chip. Chip asked, how has your activity changed from before eFile to after eFile appointments for me?
Good question, Chip. It's allowed me to play offense on my business instead of defense. And that's the other part that I like about it. I didn't really like the calling part anyways. And so it allows me to play the offense instead of defense.
Excellent. Great question, Chip. Thanks for participating here. All right, Anne Marie. She's asking, without having an assistant, do you ever feel overwhelmed? I was told before that P-File is great, but you need to be staffed correctly. I too do not have an assistant at the moment.
Well, it's helped me be able to take a lot of things off my plate. So therefore it helps me in that manner of getting other things done.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Anne Marie, for the question. And then our last one here, Will is asking around how many life policies have you wrote that you would credit with the use of P-File?
6 so far.
Great. Thank you, Will, for the question. Yeah, I'm starting out in February, getting that fast start, and it takes some time to get, up and running and trained and everything with the P-File system. So that's fantastic. Okay, Guy said, I know one agent that has the clients answer the P-File questions on an iPad. The agent hands that to the client. Clients love it. Have you ever looked into that, Darla? That's what Jim was just talking to you. And we can have Jim touch on that. That is a good feature. Thanks, Guy, for bringing that up. So Jim, we'll let you cover that because I know a lot of reps have had success with that early on, and I know you just implemented that new feature. All right. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and transition into, thank you so much, Darla. Let's give Darla a round of applause. And Darla will be on here for the remainder of the session. So if any other questions come up, please add them to the chat box. But without further ado, we'd like to introduce Jim Bologna. He's the CEO and founder of P-File. I know I introduced you in the beginning a little bit here, Jim, but I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more and take the floor from here. So thanks, Jim, so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. And we can hear you too, so perfect.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm actually at your home office right now, going similar with the way. Worked out there with Chicago for another meeting yesterday, so I said I'm going to come down to this presentation here. So great to be on campus. And yeah, I've been in the financial services industry now 25 years. Came out of oil in Chicago. I'm from Michigan. Company based in Michigan. My roots are all in Michigan. So I'm very familiar with what you're trying to accomplish as country reps, country management. Went over to Northwestern Mutual back in the year 2000 to 2006 with financial services. I love what we do. To this day, I'm still a financial services rep. I have my clients. I manage over 100 million in retirement assets. I personally have sold over 3,000 life policies. So I live and breathe what the rep is trying to accomplish. And my success came from working with multi-line in Michigan as I was recruited over to help these agents identify and sell more life insurance in retirement. And before I went over, there was a group that went over to Northwestern back in 2006 to this multi-line carrier. And I was kind of like, you guys let me know what it's all about over there. And he came back and he said, you wouldn't believe it. The actual multi-line agent, they have anywhere between 300 to over 1,000 households sitting in this existing book of business that we sell home and auto insurance to, and they have relationships. And I said, okay. And basically what we're trying to do is take a conversation from home and auto to help identify life insurance and retirement assets. But if we can position it in a certain way, I think we can find a lot of opportunity in these books of business. So before I went over, I really studied business sale. I studied the policy review. And let me emphasize this. Your car review process is such a foundation. And what every rep should be doing is engaging in that car process. Because when you start digging into the existing book of business, I guarantee you there is a lot more sales in the that existing book than anybody knows because of the experience that we have in the metrics that we've measured over the years. But the one thing that stood out to me what you see on the screen right now, this is obviously a liability conversation. But what I found is that as a representing multi-line item, you have the opportunity and the authority to talk about the client's assets if you're going to properly protect them from an insurance standpoint. So what I started to do is I started to have the actual agents I was working with really lean in on liability limits. And as I started to do this, what I found is that, especially in new business sales, the previous insurance agents where your clients are coming from, nobody really explains liability coverage to anybody. So that was a foreign conversation to them, and they really didn't understand what liability limits did on their policy. And that was an opportunity to engage in a 5 to 7 minute conversation to really uncover the assets of the household so you could properly quote the liability limits and give the proper coverage and identify coverage gaps once you have the liability conversation. So what I did on the last week, I went on to AI and I said, what is the actual process if somebody gets into an accident and gets sued because they hurt someone? How and what gets uncovered during that conversation through that entire process? So what I uncovered was, and I would really stress, they really train to this, especially in the field, so they can explain to their clients the importance of those liability limit coverages. But what they're going to find is that if you get into an accident and the actual client gets sued, the first thing they're going to encounter is what's called pre-litigation. And that pre-litigation uses public records to pull out property, vehicle titles. Then they also have investigators to start to assess the assets to determine collectability, right? And that includes real estate, vehicles, bank accounts, investments, business ownership, personal property, trust, income sources. This is all in the discovery phase when somebody hurts another person. That your client don't know that this could be a possibility. And what we're doing today is we're going to make sure that all the assets are identified and we've assessed values now, so we can properly assess and give you the right limits of liability. And that was the opening conversation back in 2007 that I started to have all these reps start to do. And then what started to happen is, so we started to uncover 401ks and IRAs and life insurance. And the beautiful thing about this conversation was that the client never felt like you were trying to sell them anything, because you're doing your job to assess first and then identify the needs. Like I said, I've been in this industry a long time. You don't get business by cold call or the very low percentage. You have to establish the needs in our before you can get the client to truly engage on what it is you're trying to leave them down, so they can identify and sell them retirement services or life insurance. Nobody buys life insurance based upon, I have an idea what you think about life insurance. No one wants to think about it, but when you create the need for the client of why they need to have life insurance, all of a sudden it becomes a different conversation. And that's what we build people around, is really leaning in on the limits of liability. So right now, what we're looking at Darla's actual dashboard. By the way, Darla, you're phenomenal. Your dedication to understanding the process and your dedication to leaning in limits of liability is going to open up an entire world for you of not only cross-sell, but really bringing you to that trusted advisor. And again, being in the industry as long as I have, we lose clients. It's part of it. But the more we know about that client, the more we service, the more items we put inside of their house. They may leave today, but it doesn't mean they're not going to come back in 6 months to a year if you left that lasting impression. And I've been in your field now for over 6 months, traveling around the country, talking to reps, and I see there's a lot of hesitation, with the conversations of we're taking rate increases, we have conversions going on. That's just part of the industry, okay? But guess what? If you have strategic car conversations and you build that relationship at the car, that client is not gone forever. They're going to come back, because that's what we do, is to build relationships. So in DeFi, what we try to do from a development standpoint is we're trying to keep things very simple for the client to go through with the actual plan. And we have these little toggle switches up on top for new customer conversations or existing customer conversations. And what I would emphasize that in your car review, before you go into anything, start to read the client, and hopefully these car reviews or in person across from your desk, so you can lean into starting the hard conversation with assessing the customer's coverages. And the main coverage you want to focus in on are the limits of liability. So what we do, just like Darwin, for her, she's got the decades ready to go. An easy entrance into the conversation would be, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I see on your auto coverages that's at 100, 300, and your home's at 300,000 of protection from a liability standpoint. I now use a calculator that's going to help me really confirm in these numbers to make sure that there's no coverage gaps. If God forbid you get into an accident, like Darla says, country's got your back when it comes to a payout. So when you explain to the client that what this scripting is here to do is to engage the client in the conversation. And like Darla's done, she doesn't use the scripting verbatim. She's kind of made it her own, but she doesn't change the course. Every time she's sitting down with the review, she's leaning into the liability limits. So I'm here, I know a lot of you have already seen these demos before, but it never hurts to see it a couple more times. What you're going to have is you're going to have the client's name already completed in there, the phone number is ready to go. And the first question you're going to lead in with the liability conversation is about vehicles in the household, right? Because those are assets. You need to verify and validate how many vehicles this client currently has. Not to sell them and to identify more, which you will down the road, but just to make sure you have all the vehicles accounted for. And as you're going to see as we go through this conversation, the beginning part of all the questions are all being simulated from an asset standpoint, which just so happens to be all of your cross-sell opportunities that could exist in the household. That's why we put PNC up front, and towards the end, that's why we get into the retirement asset question towards the end, because you've warmed up your client in these conversations. Next question is going to be, do you own any recreational vehicles? And again, the scripting is there for you to list the items. And clients don't want to think as they're having these conversations. They want you to do the thinking for them. So you're leading them down the path with questions. If they do have recreational vehicles, list it for them. Say, hey, do you have any motorcycles, RVs, boats, watercrafts? I can't tell you how many golf carts that have been identified because we started to ask the question about golf carts, right? But you're going to identify whatever the client indicates they have in the household. And then to assess the value of these items, we strategically put in slider bar values and from a range standpoint. Why do you want it to be a range standpoint? Because it's not for Darla to have to get into the weeds with the client in the conversation, get blue book values for these items she's uncovering. Give us an approximate range, and together you and the client are determining the value from a range standpoint, so the calculator can assess the value as it goes through the conversation. Next is going to be how many children or dependents do you have living at home or away at college? Again, a strategic question that you can ask at this point, because we want to identify the young drivers from a liability standpoint. But the reality is that children is the number one life insurance need that you can create inside of a household. So this is very easily for us to ask young drivers, but it's indicating to us children in the home. Next question is going to be about your primary home, right? What's the approximate value of the biggest asset if they own their home? If they rent, you click on rent, you go to the next question, but we're going to say this client owns their home. But it's strategically placed into the questions for this reason, because once you've identified a home value, it just makes sense to identify whether or not the client has a mortgage balance. Because once you identify mortgage balances in the home, this is the best time to ask the client, do you have any life insurance or mortgage protection insurance to pay off the balance of the mortgage should something happen to you? And we fit the life insurance question strategically in places that would make sense for the client to answer this question with no hesitation. And like Darla said, once you click on yes, you can hover over the types of life insurance, and it can give you a brief description and educate not only the client, but yourself on the type of life insurance they may have inside the household. And then again, you're just going to get the approximate death benefit of the life insurance. And think about this. The first 5 questions, you've just identified clients that have mortgage balances, children in the household, and now you know whether or not you even own life insurance. That's what it's all about. Needs-based selling. Next question is going to be about secondary properties. This is where you're going to identify by the secondary homes, the rentals, the vacant property. And every question we're asking has a did you know at the bottom of the screen. The did you know is there to explain to you as the rep, as well as to your client, the reason you need to know this if you're going to properly quote the limits of liability. But as professionals, we know those are assets we need to identify. Next is going to be about special personal property. Again, the jewelry, the cameras, all that good stuff. Our farmers, they have firearms, right? Really identifying assets inside that household. Next is the best question we can ask. We need to know, as planning individuals helping these clients with their insurance coverages, whether or not they have ownership interest in businesses. Because if they have ownership interest in businesses, those might be liabilities. God forbid something happens to your client, and that attorney could find their way into that business if it's not set up correctly. But you as the rep, that's your indicator to let you know you have a potential business owner you're talking to, and that's your pivot into a commercial conversation. Again, all indicators that you're walking the client through. Next question is going to be your current employment status. If they don't own their own business, we want to find out, are they employed, are they unemployed, retired? And I love how Darla incorporated, do you have any orphan or old 401ks lying around? Because that's a simple question to ask at this time, because once you identify the employment, you're going to type it in and how long they worked there for. And we've done this strategically too, because if they say, well, I've been there less than a year, and then you ask, do you or your spouse have a retirement plan? The client says yes. And again, hovering over the types of accounts that they could have from a retirement plan with a deep brief description. If the client says, yes, I have a 401k value, and oh, by the way, what's the approximate value of that 401k? And they say $200,000, and they've only been at their employer less than a year, you know there's an old 401k that's sitting out there. Again, another indicator. But you don't need to get into the weeds with them and get financial statements and how's it diversified. Let me talk to you about that. Just find the information as you're going through this. Next question, we're going to ask the client, second to last question, we list, do you have any IRAs, annuities, savings accounts, cryptocurrencies? Again, going back to that original slide I showed you, we need to identify all the assets in the household, be prudent to make sure we got the proper coverages. But as you're identifying with that client, again, we're going to get the approximate values. Click on the next button, which is the last question in the risk assessment. So there's 12 questions with pop-ups that you go through with the client. And we find it down to be so simple and easy that the last question is always the taboo, right? Household income. Reps always have kind of a challenging time to ask the client, how much money do you make? Because I need to know that. Well, the beautiful thing about using our risk assessment calculator is you blame it on the calculator. Tell them our calculator defaults to an income range between 25 and 50,000 a year. Now, let me explain to you, Mr. and Mrs. Client, your income could be garnished, get into an accident that can come into play. How much household income would make sense from a range standpoint to populate the calculator? And the client will voluntarily tell you with no hesitation the actual range value of the household income. And then you go to this calculate coverage here. The reason we have a one-pager is that you can launch off of this page from the cross-sell conversations. So what we're trying to do is we're explaining to you all the assets, and we're putting them according to their accounts and then listing a total household asset value minus any mortgage balances, right? The mortgage is debt. We want to make sure we identify just the equity. So in the house, it's easy to say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you have about $1.3 million of total assets we consider when talking about limits of liability. Going down below, the system now is going to suggest what the auto limit should be, what the home limit should be, and whether or not this client should be considering an umbrella policy. And we found that using eFile, it now elevates the conversation from a trusted advisor standpoint of you explaining the importance of an umbrella policy and a broad range of coverage it gives you. In addition to that, this is the additional P&C opportunities that now have been presented in front of you for you to identify and say to yourself, are we insuring those? And if we're not, let's have a conversation about bundling the discounts, the more items we have under the Country Financial umbrella. In addition to that, we have a suggested minimal life insurance that this client should be considering. So when you get to this point here, you can say, listen, the calculator is suggesting that we talk about $1 million life policy. And how did we come up with that number? Well, we identified the mortgage balances, so we want to make sure that those are all paid off, God forbid something happens to the breadwinners. Mortgage balances are cleared off. Then the number of kids in the house that we added $100,000 of benefit. And then right next to that is income replacement. So that last question that we asked about their household income serves as multiple purposes, because that's part of the formula that we can tail back into and say, we need to replace 5 times, which is the way customizable to the user. So we can put the formula at 3 times income replacement all the way up to 10 times income replacement. So now you can validate how you came up with that number. It doesn't mean the client's going to jump out of their seat and say, where do I sign? But it brings the conversation ahead. So you can now say to the client, you know, 7 questions ago, you told me that you had $200,000 of coverage for your employer in a term policy. You really need to be at $1 million. Next step in my process, and I would encourage you to say this, is that I'm going to put together some proposals and quotes for you. In addition to that life policy, I'm going to also put the bundling with the motorcycle, and then I'm also going to have a discussion and put together a quote for an umbrella policy. And I would also urge that, yes, BFAL does a great job with follow-up calls, and that follow-up call was there purposely to thank the client, make sure they had a great experience, and kind of pivot off of that to get them back on your calendar so you can have a strategic conversation. But while you got this client captured, launch right off of this page and book that next appointment right then and there with the client and to bring them back into your agency so you can have an actual sales conversation with all of the opportunities that you uncovered in the liability conversation. So I'm going to stop there and open up for any types of questions on the risk assessment tool. And back to you, Christy.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim, for walking us through that. We do have questions here in the chat box. The first one was from Guy. Can you touch on, Jim, the calculator link and how you can go through those on an iPad with client?
As soon as I unshared my screen, I thought, oh, I forgot to show the link. You're the man. I appreciate it. So going back in, sharing my screen here. So every rep that signs up on the system has a profile. In the profile here on your page, you scroll on down, and you're going to see that there's this link here, okay? And in this link, if you copy and paste it, and what we're doing on BFile is we're trying to get everybody that's on the system back in front of Jamie. Where Jamie has an actual template that you put inside of your bookings. And in the bookings template, when you schedule that review, it's going to say at the reminder to the client through bookings, before we have this actual appointment, we'd like for you to use our risk assessment tool so we can be properly prepared to identify any liability needs and making sure that your assets match up to your liability coverage. So what we do is copy this link into that bookings tab, and when we do that, the client clicks on it before the appointment, it takes them to this page here. So think about it. Now you have the client sent up the email invite, and the invite is a message with this link. The client clicks on this link, and in this link now, it will explain to the client the importance of getting liability coverage correct on your policies. And again, please fill this out before our appointment. When the client goes through the actual calculator, the calculator is exactly what you just saw that we went through as a rep. But when you get to the very end of the calculator, the difference between what you're doing compared to the client filling this out is that we don't give the results to the client at the end of this risk assessment with this link. What we do is say, thank you for filling this out. You will be going over this at your next review and the conversation. So now all of a sudden we filled all of this out. We did a thank you for filling this out. And you as a rep gets a notification to your email that this client just completed a risk assessment tool. So now you can start to strategically use this. BFile doesn't send out any emails to your client. You have no correspondence with your client, but you as a country rep, you can now through your email actually paste that link along with a message to your client to have them start filling out this risk assessment. The wording just has to be about making sure they're properly protected and their liability limits to really engage them to make sure that they click that link so you can start getting this information before you even meet with the client. So That's the link that we just developed, and we're having some cool success out of the gate.
Yeah, that's really neat. Thanks for covering that, Jim. We have a question from Will. He said, would you recommend using tool monitors? One being the client facing for these questions so that the client can see what we are asking and why we are asking them.
All day long. 2 monitors is a minimum in our industry. Every rep should have 2 monitors regardless, and they should have a TV on their wall where you can stream it right into their office and put it up on the wall for the client, the rep to go over. And I would also really urge that as you're going through this with your client, flip the screen and hand the client the mouse and just walk them through it. Have the client fill it out right in front of you. So it's a non-threatening conversation.
Good question, Will. All right, Jason Simek, and there are a couple questions here. One thing I've always struggled with is quantifying how much future income should be included into the calculation. How did you come up with 1 times annual income? How firm is that in real life situations that result in a large lawsuit?
As far as 1 times income, you're talking about liability assessment from an income, or is it life insurance recommendation?
I believe he was referring to 1 times annual income. He said, how firm is that in real life situations to result in a large lawsuit? I'm assuming P&C, but Jason, let me see. Yeah, I'm assuming P&C.
Yeah, here's the quick answer. So from the way that the calculator and the formulas are built is that once you pass a certain threshold, it's going to bump you up to the next. I rather recommend more coverage than less. As far as, 1 time annual income in an actual suit, it all depends how much is exposed from a garnishment of wages. And again, it's always a percentage of the wages. Nobody's entire wages garnished in an actual lawsuit. It's usually a percentage, and it changes state to state. But keep in mind, the B-file page where all the results are, those are all there for big talking points. It's not the end all be all, right? But it's going to engage the conversation to pull it out so you can pivot off of that. So you can have your own recommendation of life insurance. You could say, now my calculator suggests it's $1 million of coverage you need, but the way I do business, I think you need 1.3 million because of this reason. Again, bring up the conversation more organically than trying to force it through an assessment.
Definitely. Thanks for the question. Thank you, Jim, as well. All right. And Jason, I will have to get back to you on your other question. Country cover punitive damages and lawsuits. How are punitive damages determined and how often are they rewarded in these situations? Yes, I will get back to you on Jason. I'll research that one for you. And then another question here, is there a Spanish version for the link that you could send to a customer?
In B-file version 2.0, we're now on 5.0 states. We did have conversion all to Spanish, but currently right now the link does not have a Spanish conversion. Great question.
Yeah, good question. All right. Tim asked, is there any way that our B-file caller can request that the client complete the RAC link prior to their car appointment? This assumes that we'd add the external rack link in bookings and advise our calling team that we've done so.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about B-file and our callers is that when we upload your list, as long as your link is embedded in there, we can add that extra at the end. By the way, we're going to be sending you an invite. It's going to have a link inside of it. The rep has requested that you complete it before the meeting. If you get a chance to, please click on that link. It's going to be sent to you through bookings. We're going to love to add that to our conversation as we're doing that. So great question.
All right. And if Darla, are you still on the line here? Like you are. Okay. We do have one question for you. How do you set time to upload the files that you send over to B-file? Do you have it set on your calendar? Do you do different types of lists like life, P&C? Can you expand on that for us?
Sure. So I will always do like the month ahead, when your clients the renewals are coming up. I'll always send the renewal list over for the month ahead or sometimes 2 months ahead. Since we've been right smack in the middle of conversion, I've only been doing 1 month ahead because you don't get the stuff from underwriting until like 3 weeks before it renews. And so I've just kind of been mindful on what type of a list I'm sending over, so it doesn't make it confusing for my caller either. But I do that. I do prospecting. Well, like I said, I'm working on a prospecting list right now for farm. Other than that, I have sent over, I think my entire list at this point they have for setting up cars for me in general. And then, of course, I have also sent over my, the term conversion list for life. And so they've been working on that for me as well.
And if I could just emphasize too, we have all the stats, the numbers of successive versions. And I'm gonna tell you out of the best actual appointment that you can schedule is a car review. You will get the most response for your car, more than a term credit list, more than a prospect list. The prospect list is a very low conversion, so you know. It runs on average, 2% of that list will convert from a prospect. Cold calling never made anybody much of anything. But the follow calls too, when you're calling the client to say, I want to do a life insurance review, there's a percentage that will bite on that, but majority of them, if it's a life insurance review, that's more of a personable call that you're making out to them to say, let's sit down, look at your whole plan, look at your life insurance. Then a random would want to review your life insurance. So make sure that the expectations are there. The best actual conversion rate we'll get is from that car conversation. So that's the highest schedule rate that we have in the system.
Okay, thank you both. All right, here we have another question from Tony, and then we just have 3 more minutes, so we'll wrap up here with some things at the end. Tony asked, maybe I missed this, but did the vehicle section list e-bikes, home endorsement / schedule?
Yeah, no, we don't have e-bikes in there, but we have a column that says other. So if there's an additional thing that you're going to want to bring up, you can hit that other, and then you can actually input it into other.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Let's give Jim and Darla a round of applause. Thank you so much for your time today and for all the knowledge that you gave us. We appreciate it. Just a couple things that we want to end with. I know we have just a couple more minutes, but going back to CAR and the resources that we have available, if you haven't been utilizing our CAR packet, we highly encourage you to do so. Darla talked about preparing for that CAR appointment. These are really good resources for you to leverage for preparing and also for during that the CAR appointment. So check those resources out. Kim will drop those in the chat box. We also have some great video demos. Troy Korsgaden and Joe Newbold have done those for us, so check out those videos. And then the last thing I want to leave you with here, as it's hard to believe we're in September, but we have dedicated here at Country, we dedicated October to our business planning month. I know a lot of you have probably participated in that in the past, but this year you're going to have a new opportunity within your business plan. You have that opportunity to evaluate which of these vendors, whether it's eFile, Canopy Connect, or Ideal Traits, or even Troy's practice management, can come into play into your business into 2026. So really take the time in these coming months to evaluate your business today and then where you want it to go in the future. And with that being said, thank you for all that you do out there. If there's some questions in the chat box that we didn't answer, we'll get to them. But thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you on the next session in November. Appreciate it. Thanks again to Jim and